Now, these little mindful awareness practices, I'm heading into a meeting and I'm going to take 10 deep breaths to calm down my central nervous system. So these are things that you can do throughout your day while you're doing anything else. You're noticing your thoughts and choosing how you're going to direct your attention in that moment. And that is the key, because what that does is it exercises that attention muscle in your brain. So it's like lifting weights for the executive function. This is about overall executive function, self-regulation, quality of life for people with ADHD.
ADHD Rewired, episode 89. This is the show designed to help those of us who have really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. My name is Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, coach, and consultant. We know that starting can be the hardest part, so let's get started. But first, let me thank our sponsors. I know how much you like to plan ahead. It was a joke. If you're interested in the ADHD Rewired Winter Coaching Group, you can let me know at coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. We begin in January. Support for this podcast comes from Audible. For a free audiobook download, go to erictivers.com/audible for a link for that free download and for some hand-picked recommendations. Go to erictivers.com/audible for your free audiobook download. If you are listening to this the week it came out on November 10th, 2015, and you've been thinking about registering for the CHAD conference, you cannot do it online anymore. But you still can hop on a plane, or if you're near New Orleans, come down anyways, because you can register on site. Go to chad.org for more information. CHADD.org, and I'll see you there. Over the past few weeks, or week and a half, I should say, I have re-engaged in a daily meditation practice. And yesterday, during my morning practice, I was focusing on just experiencing thoughts. I wasn't trying to make anything happen. And in the process, something interesting happened. I forgot to silence my phone, and I was getting a call on Facebook, and I knew who it was from. And what happened was really interesting. Instead of being frustrated by the distraction, I felt this sense of joy and gratitude that the person that I knew was trying to reach me, that I had the opportunity to engage and talk with someone who I'm collaborating with on a project. And the remainder of that meditation was focusing on joy and gratitude. And during the course of this meditation, I began to cry. And it was tears of joy that I felt like nothing could really bother me. That there was so much to be grateful about. There's so much that I am doing right now that instead of allowing the stress to build about all the things that I have to do, I realize that these are things that I'm choosing to do. This week, I'm working on finishing my presentation for the CHAD conference. And while it would be easy to feel stressed and maybe burdened by the need to complete this task, what I found is joy and a sense of ease while working on this task, because what I kept thinking about was how grateful I am to have this opportunity. It just takes a few minutes each day to breathe and notice. Gratitude is a choice. You have to look for it. It's there. Hey, everybody. I'm really excited about today's show. We have a brand new segment that I'm going to be introducing today that's going to come in right after the break. It's going to be an ADHD nerd moment brought to you by Ryan McCrae, who I've had on the show twice. And he's going to be delivering a periodic ADHD nerd moment. And so definitely tune in about halfway through the show. It'll be right before we come back from the break. And he's going to share with us a very ADHD nerdily unique tip on how he practices mindfulness. I know for those of you who have been listening for a long time know that I sometimes have my son come on the show. The last 30 seconds, you won't want to miss it. And now, let's get on with the interview with Casey Dixon. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. I am thrilled to welcome to the ADHD Rewired virtual studios, Casey Dixon. Casey is an ADHD coach. She works with high-demand professionals, especially lawyers and professors. And she recently launched a brand new website called Mindfully Adhd, a website which helps adults with ADHD develop the habit of mindfulness. So, Casey, welcome to ADHD Rewired.
Thanks, Eric. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. And so I know that we were just recently talking before I actually hit record about just some of our experiences in mindfulness. And I was sort of talking to you that I've kind of re-engaged in the practice of mindfulness. So before we kind of get into that piece of it, will you share with my listeners kind of why you got into mindfulness and what mindfulness kind of is to you, and try to include in that some of your backstory of kind of who you are?
Okay. That's a lot, but
as I was saying that, I was like, oh, I just asked you like 43 questions in that intro.
That's okay. I think I can handle it. But,
which just do what politicians do. Just answer whatever they want to say.
Right. We'll start with the fact that I'm an ADHD coach, and I do work with people who have really high demand sort of careers. I also work with college students who are headed in that direction, so that keeps me sort of young. But also, for the last 10 years, I've been thinking, there's just so many interesting things out there that could be useful to my clients. But the research is pretty sketchy on a lot of them. Is it about diet, or is it about, back when I was in special education, there was a mom who used to send mutton to school with her son because of this thing called a mutton diet to help him focus during the day.
What is mutton?
It's I don't even know, some kind of sheep. I don't know. But the point is that...
Wait, like an animal?
Yes, it's some sort of cut of meat, but
okay.
It was disgusting. This poor little kid was in the middle of the cafeteria, like, okay, I got to eat my mutton now, and it's just people are sort of desperate to hook into something that's actually really going to work for their clients, and a lot of things that we've been saying, hey, you should try this and you should try that. This might work, and this is something I've heard about. A lot of those things are really overly simplistic and don't actually work. And the research, like I said, some research is sketchy. Some comes out saying yes, and then 2 months later, another study comes out saying no. and we're really not really sure about it. So over the last 10 years of working as an ADHD coach, I've really been looking and keeping my eyes out for something that has a really solid foundation with the research and is something that's accessible enough to our clients that we're not just saying, okay, here's another thing to put on your pile of things that you have to do in order to manage your ADHD better. Mm-hmm. And mindfulness strikes me as one of those things. And I had been, for my personal side, a yoga practitioner for, about the last 25 years. And I got into that because of some chronic pain issues. And the yoga led me into sort of my own mindfulness practices. And I worked actually with a really amazing local group called Kinder Associates, and they do a program called Wellness Works in Schools. And they go into schools and community organizations and do yoga and mindfulness and meditation awareness with kids and adults who are struggling with executive functioning in a classroom. So I reached out to them when I realized that mindfulness might be useful for my clients, and said, there are not a lot of resources out there for people with ADHD who want to practice mindfulness. Let's put our heads together and come up with something. And that's how Mindfully ADD came about.
It's a great kind of coming to story. So And now your background, you worked in the school system?
I worked in private schools. I worked in a private school for kids with learning disabilities and attention deficit disorder.
And what did you do there?
Well, I started out as a tutor. When I was in college, I started out, it took me about 7 years to get through my undergraduate degree because I hopped around a lot. I started out as an art student, and I ended up with a degree in philosophy. And in the meantime, I had been a geology major and a sociology major and all sorts of other things. But I was really interested in cognitive processes and did a lot of work with how linguistics and analytical logic overlap, which maybe all of your listeners just sort of signed off when I said that.
So break it down for us then.
They're like, what? But anyway, I started to learn about how the brain processes information and how we learn, and specifically how people with dyslexia really could be highly, highly intelligent and still struggle to learn how to read in the way that we were teaching them in the school system. Now, this was 20 years ago. So, we didn't do as good of a job at it as we are doing now. Thank goodness. And the little school that I started working at, I was the art teacher and the tutor there, helping little kids with ADHD learn to read and also to focus in the classroom. Eventually, I ended up becoming the head of school there as the school grew, and I grew with it. And I was the acting head of school because the other head of school had left, and they said, hey, we need somebody to kind of take over. Now, that was a job
like the headmaster?
Yes, I was the headmaster, which is really funny, or headmistress, which is always such a lovely term. But the kids just called me Casey. So that was kind of it was a small, really warm and caring kind of school community environment, and I loved it there. But when I became the head of school, I realized that was a job that was not a good match for me.
What made it not a good match?
Well, it was, I went from working on how do kids learn and working with teachers, and was doing a lot of outreach with universities and local schools and hospitals on how to work with people who have ADHD and learning disabilities. And that was a fascinating experience. And then I found myself sort of switching into doing fundraising and board committee meetings at 7:30 in the morning, which were really boring, and helping to manage the physical plant and really making a lot of decisions about now, I went from being it's sort of a helpful person to the teachers and the parents and the students to being their boss. And
you became an administrator versus a practitioner.
I really did. And I had a hard time with that transition. And it wasn't all bad. I mean, I think it went well, and the school, I cared enough about the school to sort of dive into that full head, totally. But I found myself struggling. So I went to a coach. Somebody that I know said, "Hey, I know this woman, and she's what they call a coach," which I had never heard of that before. She's an executive coach. Her name is Donna Steyer, and she works here in Pennsylvania. And she was amazing and really helped me to get a grip on the anxiety that I was riddled with at the time. And then to realize that, when I got up in the morning.
Was your anxiety situational, or did you experience anxiety kind of over the course of your life?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I had some generalized anxiety for most of my life. I'm a worrier. But this really brought it and exacerbated it to the point where I was thinking, wow, I'm like, this is unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't treat me for that, but she said, you need to recognize that something in your life needs to be adjusted in order for you to feel good about what you're doing and to move forward. And it was a really cathartic experience, because what I realized was that even though this was something that a lot of my family were really proud of me, like, oh, look at you, you're the head of school and this is a big job. I still didn't really want that job. And that's tough. It's tough to step away from success. She also made me realize that, when I got up in the morning and put on my principal's suit,
Your
that
costume.
I was sort of, yes, exactly. That I was also sort of putting on an imposter's mask of somebody that wasn't truly me.
And I think so many of us really struggle with that, the whole imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I know that this month, Linda Ragley wrote an article. It's on the cover of Attention magazine, all about pretending to be normal. And I so relate to that idea, because it's like I have a placard at home in our kitchen that says masquerading as normal day after day is exhausting.
It is exhausting, and it really depletes. I think first your cognitive resources, and then second your physical resources. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, why am I having back pain? Or why am I getting these migraines? Well, it's not really back pain or migraines that are at the root of what's going on with you. It's something in your life needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons that I can relate to my ADHD adult clients who are in these sort of very successful jobs. I mean, I'm working with this amazing group of clients who have PhDs, and they're going to UN conferences and they're arguing cases at a national level. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Like, my parents would be astonishingly proud if I was doing that kind of work, but they're still not feeling really good. They're completely depleted by the end of every single day.
And so you say you can relate to your adult clients. Now, you don't have ADHD yourself, correct?
No, I don't.
And you refer to yourself, what was the phrase you said?
Well, actually, I was talking to Jody Sleeper Triplet at the CHAD conference last year, and somebody had asked her, well, do you have ADD? And she said, no, I'm an ADD wannabe. Casey over there and I, of all the ADHD coaches in this networking session, are ADHD wannabes. And I thought, that is so... it's true and it's not true. Of course, I'm not going to say I want to have this very difficult and can be very trying to live with disorder, and I'm making air quotes now. But, I think that there is something about that that's very appealing to why do people like Jody Sleeper Triplet and I jump into working with people who have ADHD? We could have chosen to work in a bunch of other different fields. And I tell this story that I was a professor at a local college here in the special education department, teaching pre-service teachers how to include kids who have special needs into the regular classroom. And I found that to be one of the most boring jobs I've ever had in my entire life. I was like, all right, my students are so easy to teach. And I'm going up there and I'm like, all right, throw me a curveball. Somebody act out, or somebody, do something that's really confusing to the rest of us, or somebody, say, I don't understand that. Can you explain it in 16 different ways until I get it? Because that's what I was doing when I was working with the kids in my private school. And that was really engaging. So I think I have a little bit of that. This has got to be a little bit of a roller coaster ride in order for me to keep myself interested and engaged. That I also is another thing that resonates with the ADHD mind with my mind. But in terms of, do I want to sign up for that? I don't think I think there are very few people who, given the choice, would say, yeah, I want to sign up for that. And if they're at that point, then they've worked really hard in order to get there in terms of acceptance and how to work with the ADHD.
I'm always interested in the whole kind of conversation about people who say that they love their ADHD.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways that's a kind of defense mechanism of, I think one, it speaks to the resiliency and grit that a lot of people with ADHD have. It's saying it's because I think that, and I'm still on the fence at this whole issue of does having ADHD make someone inclined to be more creative? And I know the research doesn't really suggest so,
right.
but I also have a hard time. So I inform what I do based on what the research says.
Right.
Yet there's this inner part of me that doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right to me. And I think part of that is when we think about, you have to be a bit kind of disinhibited to be creative, right? And I think this idea of I kind of refer to myself as a sort of pattern thinker, where I could see 3, 4, 5 things that don't seem to be related. And it almost comes just naturally to me. So the creativity piece, it's hard to distinguish and really understand how is that not connected to ADHD. All of that being said, I think that if I were given the choice, if someone said, here's a magic wand or in Alice in Wonderland, take the blue pill or take the red pill, and you can get rid of it, or I think I would get rid of it. Because it's hard. I have to work so hard. Now, and I was doing a sort of thought experiment a while back about this whole idea of if I actually could get rid of it, or I think I was doing this when I was I was investigating the idea if I had potentially had an underlying sleep disorder. And if I did, and that was the root kind of cause of what was presenting as ADHD,
right,
then I would be in the predicament of, okay, so I've established an ADHD based career based on having ADHD.
now what am I going to do? That's funny. Well, and I think, I do think that ADHD, and this is true for, in my 25-year career working with people who struggle with their cognition and how to make it work more efficiently, they're not going to sign up for that. It's a hard struggle. And I think if we oversimplify it and say, hey, this makes you more creative or makes you more resilient, then that's really doing an injustice to what people get up every day to face in terms of getting just through the day in a self-regulated way that they can feel good about themselves at the end of the day. At the same time, I do think that, I seem to hang out with a lot of people who fit into that bucket of here's a bunch of people and, everybody I know has ADD. Well, okay, that's first of all not true. But it's because they sort of walk in groups, or as people say, this is our tribe. Then we have affinities with people who think like us and feel like us and process information like we do and care about the same types of things that we do. So it almost can feel like, hey, ADD can be can be a gift because it brought me together with these people. It's helped me to be disinhibited to the point where I can be creative. And it's pushed me in a way where I have had to be more resilient in order to get through the day and be that successful person that everybody else is seeing the mask of right now. At the same time, I think it's way more complicated than that.
Yes. Yes. I think having a one sentence kind of expression of anything as complex as ADHD. I mean, I think it makes it accessible, but then you gotta dig in and really explore and get curious about what does this actually all mean? Because if we just focus on the quote unquote the gifts, the strengths, then we're actually doing a disservice to ourselves and to our clients. If we just focus on the challenges and struggles, we're also doing a disservice to ourselves and our clients.
Right. And this is sort of something that I wanted to bring up because after 10 years of doing, the coaching thing with people who are really struggling, when I first started out, I thought, I know a lot about ADHD. Now, this was 10 years ago, and we know a lot more about ADHD than we did 10 years ago, which has been a really fun ride to be on. But, at that point, it was help me with my time management skills. And, I had some wonderful solutions and strategies and helpful tips on how to develop habits and routines and plan and prioritize and get started and all of those things that we needed, kind of help people to manage. Since then, I've realized I was also missing part of the puzzle, which was to help people to adjust their context in a way that is more matched to their true self, even if we take away the support of the structures and the strategies and the new habits.
Okay, talk to me about what do you mean? I think I know what you mean, but I want to explore this. What do you mean by adjusting the context?
My own experience with, when I left this sort of headmistress role and said, I'm going to become an ADHD coach. All of a sudden, everything flowed for me in a way that I had not experienced before. I was much more engaged in my work. It was a lot easier for me to get things done and follow through and self-regulate. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it was really, really manageable. And I think it's because I made a drastic change in my context, which takes a lot of, courage to do when you're in a place of success in particular. And some know-how. It's like, well, okay, if I quit my really successful job, then what am I going to do? So you have to figure out what is the right match for you. And that's also part of, a lot of people have been talking about the acceptance piece that goes with it. And I do think that's an important conversation to have because I also think that we oversimplify that. Acceptance is not a linear journey. We're not going to go from chaos to being accepting and loving our ADHD in one fell swoop. It's, kind of circle around on that again. I had a woman who I was talking with yesterday, and she said, when I got my diagnosis, it was such a relief and it made so much sense. And I knew how to go out and get help, and the medication and coaching and really implementing things have been super effective. And then I caught myself this week saying, wow, why isn't this working better? That sort of mean person that lives in your head was revisiting her. And maybe I'm just using ADHD as an excuse again. So she was reverting back to a lot of the habits that she had before her diagnosis. So this acceptance piece is circular, and we're going to have to revisit it again and come back. And hopefully we talked about it as sort of a roller coaster. When you're in that moment of chaos and things are really out of control, you're on the big, scary, giant roller coaster at the amusement park, going way up and down and going around curves too quickly, and it's scary. With treatment and coaching and medication and mindfulness and good habits like sleep, you might be able to get on the kiddie roller coaster so that the ups and downs aren't quite so high and the curves aren't quite so sharp and it doesn't feel quite so terrifying, but it's still going to be there. And I think that that's an important thing to accept. Like, there's nothing wrong with you if you don't get to that point where you're like, hey, I love my ADHD and who cares what anybody else thinks? It's not fair to expect people to do that either.
No, I think that's really insightful. And, I was sort of thinking about, because I'm definitely with you on that understanding of acceptance when you have a disability, that's a lifelong disability. When I was 14, my dad had a brain aneurysm and, left him with some significant disabilities. And, so that really introduced me to the whole notion of acceptance and grief and loss when you're dealing with, you have to grieve this notion of this is, I'm never going to be able to, do this the way maybe somebody else is, or, there's certain things I may always struggle with, or I have to work harder at certain things than other people, or I may always be somewhat inconsistent. My goal is going to be to decrease the inconsistency.
Exactly.
So I think that grieving that loss is really important, and that what you said is it's not linear. That we go back and forth, and it's. Have you ever seen that graphic that says what success looks like, and it's like a point A from the bottom left of a picture to the top right of a picture, but in between is all these scribbles and going back and forth, zigzags, and next to it says what people think it looks like, and it's just a straight line up. I love that because it's so true. It's so true.
And if we tell our clients, as people who work and care for people with ADHD, that it looks like that straight line, then that gives them, I really think that there's some things that we do that can be more hurtful than helpful. And that's one of them, because they got home and they're by themselves and it's late at night and they're cognitively depleted, which exacerbates the executive function. And that mean guy comes out in their head and says, all right, you got the help you needed. So why don't you feel like you're at the top of that straight line?
You should be able to do this.
Right.
Those shouldy thoughts.
That straight line is it's a false premise. It doesn't follow that that's actually going to be your experience.
Mm-hmm. So, and the squiggly lines it's a lot more of a journey, and so it's a lot of this, looking at like, Carol, what's her growth, mindset. I'm totally blanking on her last, thank you, ADHD, for not giving me access to the name part of my brain. Dwerk? Oh man, sorry, Carol, because her work was influential, and
you'll have to put it on the site afterwards, because I can't help you with this one. I'm sorry.
It's a whole idea of fixed mindset versus growth mindset.
Yeah.
And, so I think no matter what struggle we are experiencing, that if we have that idea, that mindset that we can grow, that, the idea is not to get through life easily, but it's to, take on the things that are rewarding for us, even when they're challenging, and that those challenges are really where that richness of life come from.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. And I think that when you're mired in the swamp, though, and you don't know how to get to the shore, that can be a really hard concept to grab onto, because all you're focused on right now is being mired in the swamp, which is, chaos, and I can't get to what I need to get to, and I'm not following through on my commitments, and I feel, pretty miserable at the end of the day. So that's where I think listening to podcasts like yours and talking to coaches and going to conferences and talking to other people with ADHD can be so important. So that you can see, hey, I'm not the only person who's doing this, and B, there are other people who've been where I've been, and they've been able to pull themselves out of the swamp. Mm-hmm. And so there is a little bit of hope there. I've seen it happen over and over and over and over and over again after 10 years. And I still have people coming to me who are new clients saying, I really don't believe that I can get better, that I can improve my situation. So it's important to say, hey, this is not going to be easy. you need the habits and the solutions and the strategies and the techniques and all of that good stuff. You need to look at your context in a really intentional way and make sure that it's a good match for you. And we need to work on the acceptance and the emotional piece, which, we're learning a lot more about that thanks to people like Tom Brown and his book, Smart But Stuck. How that can sort of, if your emotional piece is not regulated, can get in the way of you implementing all those wonderful strategies that you and your coach came up with or that you read about in a book.
Casey, let's do this. I'm gonna take that softball and hit it out to the break.
Okay.
So we're gonna be right back. We're gonna thank our sponsors, and we'll be right back. We're gonna get into more of a deeper conversation of mindfulness-based practices, and how can those of us with ADHD actually sit for a moment and just notice. I bought my plane ticket. My hotel room is booked. I'm registered for the conference. What's left? I have to finish my presentation. I have plenty of time. Wait, no, I don't. Okay, don't panic. I have most of it done. I just have to tweak a few things and completely rewrite my introductory story to reflect the latest insights that I've been swimming around in my head. I'm going to get back to working on my presentation in just a moment. In the meantime, if you haven't registered for the conference yet, it's November 12th through the 14th in New Orleans, the Big Easy. And look, I know some of you might be thinking, I can't afford this conference. It's $240 for the conference, and it's probably going to be at least a couple $100 for airfare, unless you drive, and then the hotel, although it could be cheaper if you split it with somebody. I think you can do that on the website. But either way, that's going to be like a couple $100, and it could all total up to $700 or $800, or maybe even more. But it's not like that supersonic gumball machine that you ordered last year on a whim, by the way, which I think was awesome. This is an investment. You could spend a year reading all the books that have been written by all the speakers who will be at this year's conference, or you can come see them present and talk to them, and who knows, maybe even have a drink with them. You could wait until the conference is over and buy the audio afterwards. But let's get real for a moment. What are the chances that you will actually get yourself to sit down and listen to this on your own? I mean, maybe you will, and if you do, great, because I would recommend it. The past audio for past conferences is also on the website, so I would check it out. But seriously, join me at the biggest tribal event for the ADHD community. Go to chadd.org. That's CHADD.org, and find out if I finish my presentation in time. Oh man, I hope no one from the Chadd Conference Planning Committee is listening to this, and if you are, I have it all under control. There's nothing to worry about. November 12th to the 14th, don't wait. Go to chadd.org. See you there.
Audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired for your free download. Trial.com/ADHD Rewired. Trial.com/ADHD Rewired. Go to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired for your free audiobook download.
I mentioned at the top of the podcast that we are going to have a brand new segment on the show. And when you hear this music, you know it's time for a moment with the ADHD nerd, Ryan McRae. Ryan, lay it on us. What is your ADHD nerd moment of the week?
Hi, this is Ryan McRae, the ADHD nerd, with my little nerd moment. I practice mindfulness in one simple way. I leave the house through the same door, and on the door jamb I have 3 stickers. They're really small and you never notice them. One of them is red, and that lets me know I gotta check myself on how I've slept. If I've slept poorly, I know to make sure I have everything with me and be aware that my ADHD is on high alert. One of them is yellow, and it reminds me to be grateful for 2 things before I walk out the door. I have to remind myself to be thankful because I remember that my life is pretty great. And one of them is blue, and that's where I check my mood. How am I feeling? How am I doing? What's going on in my mind? And I try to engage and see what that's all about. It's quick, takes less than a minute, and that's what I do. It's a great habit, and it's added a lot to my life. And I'm Ryan McRae, the ADHD nerd, and now back to the show.
That was Ryan McRae from the ADHDnerd.com. Ryan, you're such a nerd. And we are back with Casey Dixon. We are talking mindfulness. So, Casey, I was talking to you right before we hit record today that I have re-engaged in an intentional practice of mindfulness-based meditation. Since grad school, I've gone through periods on and off where we'll do an intentional practice of the meditation of mindfulness. Now, I do think that I live a very kind of mindfully aware kind of life. I think that's part of that metacognition piece that's so helpful with ADHD. Yeah. We have to really be, thinking about how we're thinking and observing what's going on internally and externally without judgment. All of those are part of mindfulness. But one of the things that I have found, because I was recently trying to get back into meditation, and I was really struggling with it. And I know for a lot of people with ADHD, that the moment that you sit down and try to quiet the mind, and I'll just share how it typically works for me. I will sit down with the intention of practicing some mindfulness with breathing, and then my to-do list. It's shouting at me in my brain.
That's right.
And then so I'll say, okay, just notice the thought, let it come in and let it go. And then as I'm watching it go, it's laughing at me and it's coming right back at me.
And I love that. It's a great example of what can happen. And, one of the things that we know about people with ADHD who are trying the mindfulness habit for the first time is that it isn't easy. We can make it as easy and accessible as possible by doing it in an ADHD informed way. But the goal is not to empty your mind. It's called mindfulness, not mind emptiness. There is a big difference there.
I never heard that. I've heard the whole, it's like, is your mind full or are you being mindful? But actually that's a different kind of variation of that. I like that.
Yeah, but we can't turn off our thoughts. And I think you had used the word quiet your thoughts, which is a lovely difference between clearing and having this empty brain. Your thoughts are going to be there. And the more that you fight against them, the more they're going to come barging in. And like you said, sort of, here I am, and I'm going to poke you and bother you until you're done with this little meditation exercise. But the other important word that you used was notice, that you're noticing your thoughts and choosing how you're going to direct your attention in that moment. And that is the key, because what that does is it sort of exercises that attention muscle in your brain. So it's like lifting weights for the executive function of, what am I going to pay attention to now? Can I shift from paying attention to my to-do list to back to paying attention to my breath or back to the movement? I mean, the other cool thing that we've learned from a lot of the research that's coming out is that mindfulness practices don't have to be sitting still.
Right.
On Mindfully ADD, we have a whole group of practices called Just Move practices. And so you're moving your body, which can combat some of that ADHD restless feeling that you might get when you say, okay, I need to sit in, my chair and meditate. We also know that you don't have to do it for very long. So if your to-do list is barging into your meditation practice and you're watching it go, because you've chosen to re-engage your focus on something else, like your body position or your breath, that's a successful practice. Whether it's laughing at you or not, you still have done that exercise, and you've still helped to give yourself a little piece of the benefits that can come from practicing meditation in order to become more mindful.
One of the things that I have certainly noticed when I am kind of re-engaging in a practice of meditation, it's very much like exercise too. It's like it's hard when you are beginning it, but then once you get into that habit of it, it's not so hard.
Right.
And I noticed that when my internal voices, all the thoughts that are happening all at the same time are kind of just like poking fun at me and saying, you're trying to quiet your mind, but that's not going to happen.
Right.
What I've found is that when I really am intentional about really focusing on sensation, that becomes very helpful for me, because it's like I need that focal point. Otherwise, my brain just goes sort of haywire. And it is a really, it's a very calming, focused sensation, this feeling when you're really aware of bodily sensation and you're able to experience it and notice it and understand it all without the absence of language. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, we spend so much time with language these days, talking and reading and listening to podcasts and news, and we're just bombarded with that at work and at home with the kids and whatever. But I think it's really important for us not necessarily to quiet the mind, but to have something that goes beyond the language piece of what we engage in so often, and help you to place yourself in the present moment. Like you said, that sort of helps to turn off the judgment, because you can't be thinking, oh, I should have finished my project today, and I actually, didn't because I was too busy playing that iPad game again. That's all an internal.
Have you been in my internal thoughts again?
I think I might have been. That's an internal dialogue. And when you shift to the paying attention to sounds in the room, or your body in space, or your seat in the chair, or your feet on the floor, then all of a sudden you lose that sort of language piece, and it takes away that judgmental voice as well, whether it's a positive judgment or a negative judgment. So it can be incredibly giving that way.
One of the things I always find interesting when I'm listening to a guided meditation and they kind of tell you to focus on a specific area of your body. Often they'll talk about focusing on your face and relaxing your eyes and your eyebrows. And my first thought was like, I'm relaxed, and then I'll focus on it. And I'm like, oh, I was holding a lot of tension there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really fascinating to me. It's like, wow. It's like, I didn't even realize how much tension I was holding there.
And that's that absent-mindedness, that is the difference of being mindful in the moment. And it can be, I'm holding tension in my jaw or my face, or it could be, I'm doing something at work which is really not productive. I'm doing that pseudo work thing that a lot of ADHD
That was the first hour of my day. I came into my office with the intention of working on a presentation, and I decided to rearrange some things on my desk.
There you go.
And then what I did as a response to that, after I finished that, I'm like, you know what? Instead of beating myself up for it, that's actually when I did a 20-minute guided meditation, and before we got on the call, and I'm really glad I did it. And yesterday too, I meditated twice yesterday. One was a 10-minute guided meditation, and then the other was I think it was a 3 or 5 minute one that I did right before a client session. And it was a client that I work with in my clinical practice who tends to kind of take me everywhere with him.
Right.
Yeah. And I was especially in the first 20 minutes of the session, I noticed how much more quickly I was able to get in sync with him and keep him focused. I was able to bring the pacing of the session slower, which I thought then created a lot more productivity in the session itself. And one of the kind of motivating factors that has also re-engaged my interest in mindfulness, and I don't know if you know much about this idea of using kind of 2 to 3 minute kind of mindfulness practices to help yourself engage in the flow state kind of quickly. Have you heard much about that?
I know a lot about short practices, 2 to 3 minutes, because a lot of our practices on Mindful ADD we have 1 minute practices, 2 minute practices, 3 minutes, because I think those are really important. When you say I did a 20-minute meditation, a lot of people are going, oh my goodness, that's
just so everybody else knows, the look of concern on your face, just when you were saying you did a 20-minute meditation.
I know.
Are you okay?
And that's fantastic if you can get there, but it's also just as fantastic if you do a 1 minute meditation or a 2 minute meditation. You still are deriving a lot of benefit.
What are the benefits that some people see from doing these 1 to say 5 minute meditations?
Well, they're really the same as the benefits for the longer meditation practices. And if we just go back quickly to some of the research that was done, Dr. Lydia Zailoska and John Mitchell and Susan Smalley and people out at UCLA did these amazing research studies on ADHD and mindfulness, just sort of to see, is this, they call it a feasibility study. And she, of course, has since written her book, Mindfulness Prescription for Adult ADHD. But the point was they only had this cohort of adults with ADHD that they did the mindfulness practice with. They only had them doing 5-minute meditations. That was it. Or at least that's where they started. I think some of them by the end are doing up to 15 minutes. The point is that research was sort of staggering. At the end of an 8-week period, which is really a short amount of time, the almost 80% of the people who were involved in that study reported reduced ADHD symptoms overall. So this is not just about, like you were going to mention, getting into that flow state. This is not just about paying attention to what I have to get done today or my to-do list. This is about overall executive function, self-regulation, quality of life for people with ADHD. So it doesn't have to be a long period of time. And I think, again, this is one of those things where we say, well, you should meditate. Okay. I was working with a client who wanted to do that. And she said, well, I've been doing some research on transcendental meditation. And I think I should start doing that. Okay. And as a coach, where I'm going to go with that, which is, what will that look like? How are you going to fit that into your routine? Who, what, where, when, how kind of questions. And she wanted to start with a 45-minute meditation practice. And I asked her if she could really picture that in her life. And she was like, yeah, of course not. There's no way I can do mindfulness. I'm too busy. I'm too overwhelmed. I can't develop habits. So she went from, I'm going to do a 45-minute everyday meditation to, I'm not going to do mindfulness at all because that's impossible. And what we know is that you can start with a really doable step instead of sort of staring at a giant leap that you can't jump into.
I have a quick question. So, Casey, you were mentioning that she wanted to do some TM, some transcendental meditation. What's the difference between that and mindfulness?
Well, I'm not a mindfulness educator, which is why I sort of hooked up with my friend Wynn Kinder, who is a mindfulness educator, to develop the mindfulness practices on Mindfully ADD. I'm an ADHD sort of coach / specialist. So when you put my area of expertise together with her area of expertise, that was actually something that came out of the research studies that John Mitchell and his fellows recommended, is that you need somebody to lead you in both of those areas. But I do know that, meditation is a formal practice, and transcendental meditation is a well-defined sort of formal practice, that it's something that you do. You can sit in your lotus position and you hold your hands in a certain way, and you can focus on certain things like a mantra, which is just a repetitive sound or words, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. But we do those meditations in order to become more mindful. So mindfulness is not that practice. That is a meditation practice, or people are calling it a mindful awareness practice sometimes because it's sort of blurry. But those practices are, like you said, they're sort of like exercising. So that's the going to the gym part. So that when you're running up and down the stairs at home, you're not winded when you get to the top because you went to the gym 3 times this week and got on the elliptical. So the meditation practice is there to increase your overall mindfulness throughout your regular life. That can happen anytime, anywhere. Now, these little mindful awareness practices, it's somewhere in between the formal meditation and the general mindfulness. This is, okay, I'm not going to sit in a formal meditation for 45, 20, or even 5 minutes. I'm heading into a meeting and I'm going to take 10 deep breaths to calm down my central nervous system and tell my amygdala to just, leave me alone for a minute so I can think. And that's a mindful awareness practice. So these are things that you can do throughout your day while you're doing anything else. It's helpful for people with ADHD to have a cue for those, like it is for a lot of other habits. So I had one client, for example, who at the end of the day, she used to hate doing her dishes and they were just piling up. And it was one of those sort of mundane daily habits that wasn't getting done. But she still had to do it. So she decided to use that as her cue for being mindful. So it wasn't a meditation practice. It was a mindful awareness that when she was doing her dishes, instead of loading the dishwasher, she decided she's going to hand wash them. And that's when she could bring in the sensations of, okay, it's late at night and it's quiet in the house and the suds and the water and the smells and the sounds of the dishes clinking in there. And that was her being really, really grounded in that moment in a non-judgmental way, expanding and improving her attention and her focus and her mindfulness. So it's sort of there's a little bit of a blurry spectrum there between general mindfulness and meditation, but that's kind of what those terms mean.
Okay, no, that was helpful. And I couldn't help but kind of thinking about, we were talking earlier about this whole idea of feeling like an imposter. And
yes.
you were giving all of these disclaimers about, I'm not a mindfulness educator. I'm and it's when we think about this idea of this imposter syndrome, that, if you have read one book on mindfulness and you have this practice that you've been doing, understanding ADHD to the depth that you do, you are much more informed than most people. So you have so much more information to offer, just even if you have only read one book. And I think it's so interesting how it's almost like, as a society, if we don't think that we are the top dog expert on something, how we feel like we need to say, well, I'm not this, it's
right.
So I would just say, I think that you are probably much more aware and have that ability to educate others on this, because you're sharing your experiences, and that's what I'm doing too.
And I appreciate that. I just think it's also important to acknowledge, like, there are people who, like the people that I'm working with, who have been, learning about and getting trained in really advanced mindfulness practices for as long as I've been doing ADHD stuff, 20 years or so. And I don't want to say, I can answer every question about mindfulness, which is why, when I go to do a presentation on this, I'm going to bring her with me. Win Kinder and I are coming as a team. And other people who are doing good work in this area are part of this dialogue. We all have something really important to contribute. With that said, I have read a lot and been, looking at a giant pile of research studies and trying to figure out what are the useful bits here for my clients, and how can I help them to make a little bit of progress towards their own goals and where they want to be. And I really think that, I'm convinced that mindfulness is a nearly perfect solution. But this kind of goes back to this paradox of, okay, we've created a solution, or we've come up with a good solution. The paradox is that solution creates problems of its own. So we offer the solution of, here's mindfulness, you should do that. All right, now as a person with ADHD, I might be thinking, well, that's impossible for me. I can't sit still that long. I can't clear my mind. I can't develop new habits. I'm already overburdened, overwhelmed, and overtired by the end of the day. And now you're telling me to do another thing? I can barely remember to take my medication. It creates a whole big pile of new problems. And that's why I wanted to create this website, because I want to say to people, I'm going to read the research and the books and talk to people and really think about, how can I help, people with ADHD who want to develop this habit give them the lowest barrier to entry and not have them say, okay, I'm going to set my expectations too high for me to jump in. But, really relax your expectations to the point where you can do it, because I promise you that the research is consistent that for most people who are going to try this, the benefits are huge and global.
Yes. That's what's really exciting about it. So what you're saying is you created this website, mindfullyadhd.com, for the person who may hear other people talking about mindfulness and have the thought, yeah, that might be good for you, but I have ADHD. I can't do that.
That's right.
Mindfullyadhd.com is for them.
That's right. Well, and I have some clients who said, okay, I tried this and I know there are some free guided practices available. I went on YouTube and I ended up watching 12 hours of, giraffe videos or whatever. I didn't do my practice. So one of the reasons Mindfully ADD is a membership site, and I did that for a very specific reason, because there are no ads. There are no, internet ghosts following you around, putting the ad for that bag that you were looking at on Amazon earlier in the week. You go on there, you can get to your practice. You can do it in a really short amount of time with a guided audio. There are also research reviews and articles that I've written. And I have a couple guest authors that I'm really excited about going to be joining me. Renee Brooks is one of them. And I know you've talked with her on the show.
Yes.
And Liz Amon, who is an ADHD coach who runs a great class on mindfulness. So, it's not just practices, but it's how to stay inspired, and get in, get out, do your practice, you're done, move on.
I like it.
That's the idea.
I like it. So I'm just going to tell you where my mind just went. I was thinking about cookies on internet websites, and because you were saying that you created this website intentionally to not have that like where it tracks you, and then you look at. So it's funny because I think that's great for your website, but I hear a lot of people say, "Well, I don't want to be tracked." Well, I often feel that if I did not complete my order on Amazon, I appreciate that website that reminds me of, oh yeah, and here's that thing you didn't purchase, and people also like these products as well. I'm like, oh, that's useful for me. I just wanted to share that that's where my brain is going.
Well, and that makes sense. I mean, those things are tailored to you, to your search engine, but you don't want to be doing that while you're trying to practice the sensory practice or walking meditation or any of that other stuff. So I can appreciate that.
So I want to ask you this question. How do you personally use mindfulness in your daily practice?
I do have a daily practice, and I say that and I think, okay, it's not every single day, but it's most days. So, I'm trying to quiet that perfectionist voice that we all have. But because of some of the I think I had talked about, I have some chronic pain issues. I have a sort of smooshy practice that I've built out of. It has a little bit of yoga move, some physical therapy exercises that I've weave in there, and then some mindfulness practices. And I do have a meditation bench that I use because you don't need that. But for me, when you sit on that bench, it sends a sort of message to your brain that this is where I am right now and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So it helps you to kind of get into that space mentally and emotionally.
What's specific about the bench?
It's a kneeling bench. So you kneel. I have a hard time sitting in a cross-legged position.
Okay, me too.
I still like to be on my yoga mat on the floor. So you kneel on it, and it has little legs that supports your bottom. So you can sit in a kneeling position without sitting on your feet.
Okay.
So it's called a meditation bench, but people can use regular chairs or cushions or whatever. But I do recommend sort of having a place when you do your formal meditations that says, this is my place. So that when you step into that space, your mind can step into it with your body. So I do a little bit of that. I do different practices. I have some words somebody had done a meditation practice with me. I took a meditation class several years ago, and she said, you can use different words. So sometimes if I'm feeling ungrounded, like my brain is flying all over the place, you can use words like, I feel like a mountain, which will sort of bring you down and ground you. So I do a little bit of that. And I think that, meditations can be really private. You can use whatever words work for you in that moment. For me, focusing on the breath was absolutely critical. And I learned how to do that through practicing yoga, but I learned the value of that when I started practicing meditations. And this is especially important, I think, for people with ADHD who have sort of anxiety disorders as part of their package, because
that's part of my package.
Yeah. And when we control our breath and how it can so alleviate those anxiety symptoms. And I'm sure you know a lot about that, but this is another really powerful exercise that people can do to turn down the anxiety volume.
Just from personal experience, and there have been multiple times where I'm in kind of a very heightened level of anxiety, and where I really just kind of close my eyes and take some deep breaths and really just allow it to be. And I've had these moments where I do that and I just accept it as it is without trying to change it, and it like melts away. And it's really remarkable. I remember there's a year or two ago I was filling up my car with gas, and I felt like I was about to have a panic attack. And I just did. I remember I had my hand on the gas pump. I'm squeezing the gas pump, and I just feel that my chest getting tight, the breathing is heavy, and I just noticed everything that I was feeling, and I took a deep breath, and it was like that anxiety like melted into the handle of the gas pump. I was like, oh. That's what it means to let it be.
Yeah. And that's a really beautiful example of, you had said before getting into this call that you decided you were kind of rebooting your mindfulness practice. And this goes back to that, okay, I'm going to set up a new habit of practicing mindfulness, and I'm going to go at it. I'm going to do it a little while. But following a typical ADHD pattern, you might not stick with that habit.
Starting is hard, maintaining is harder.
Right. But restarting is easier if you've started it once before in the past. So you've just rebooted your mindfulness practice, and you're already doing a 20-minute meditation and feeling really good about it. That I would be willing to bet that that's because you've done this in the past, and you already sort of have your brain wired in that direction so that you can pick up and kind of start fresh with things that you already know how to do. And then during that sort of panic moment with the gas tank, you're calling those habits and saying, okay, what do I need right now to deal with this panic? Oh, there's that mindfulness ability to breathe and accept and calm down. So those are resources that you can develop and grow using meditations and mindful awareness practices so that you can call them when you need them.
So Casey, tell people where they can learn more about you, and so give your website, email, all that kind of great stuff where people can access all the resources that you've talked to us about today.
Okay. I actually have two websites. One is for my coaching practice, and people can learn a little bit more about that and about me, and that is DixonLifeCoaching.com. So it's DIXON lifecoaching.com. I have a resources page there that they can look at in a couple of articles, although I just started doing articles this year, so I think there are only a couple up there. The other website that we've been talking about today is Mindfully ADD. That's MindfullyADD.com.
You're also on Twitter too, right?
I love Twitter. I
would definitely recommend Twitter. Following Casey and Mindfully ADD on Twitter.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my Twitter handle is Dixon Life Coach. And of course, I have another Twitter account, Mindfully ADD. I love to post on there all the time and share resources, and on Facebook, Dixon Life Coaching page and a Mindfully ADD page as well. If you go to the Mindfully ADD homepage, there are some free resources too. You won't be barred from sort of trying things out. There are a couple articles you can listen to and some free audio practices that we've recorded and posted up there, so you can check it out. And if you're interested in joining, you can try it for free for 7 days.
Awesome. Casey, thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed this. As it's I know that mindfulness has been a topic that a lot of people in my community keep wanting me to do more and more kind of shows about, because I think it's something that it's of high interest because our people are seeing its benefits. Mm-hmm. So, Casey, you're going to be at the CHAD conference?
I am going to be at the CHAD conference speaking about mindfulness and ADHD.
So depending on when this airs, I will either see you there or it was good seeing you.
Yes, exactly. That sounds perfect.
And with podcasting and delayed release dates, it just confuses the time part of my brain. It's like, do I talk about it as it's happening now or as if when it's released, or, because this is all evergreen content.
That's right. Exactly. People can listen to it over and over again, which is really great. So thank you for doing what you do.
Well, thank you, Casey Dixon. And, check out her stuff, mindfullyadhd.com. Thanks, Casey. Thank you for listening to another episode of ADHD Rewired. And if you're new to the show, welcome to ADHD Rewired. We are more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. You can see a full outline of this and all other episodes with all the links and other resources mentioned during this interview at ADHDrewired.com. Help support this podcast by checking out my sponsors. I use Zoom video conferencing nearly every day, and so can you. Go free or go pro. But please go to erictivers.com/Zoom so they know that I sent you. And you can get a free audiobook from Audible at erictivers.com/Audible. And next time you shop Amazon, use the Amazon search portal at ADHDrewired.com. A small percentage of your purchase will go to support this show, and it doesn't cost you anything extra. You can also support this podcast by leaving an honest rating and review in iTunes or Stitcher. This really helps other people find this show. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Don't just be a passive listener, be an active member of the ADHD Rewired community. We are on Facebook. You can like our page, but please submit your request to join our free and growing community. And don't forget to check your other inbox because I screen everybody before they come into our community. Looking for a coach? If you're still listening at this point and you answered yes, come to my website at ADHDrewired.com and schedule your free 20-minute consultation, or call me at 224-993-9450. Is your school, business, or organization hiring speakers? I provide fun and engaging presentations full of practical solutions that both educate and entertain. Hire me for your next professional development day or corporate training event. Go to ADHDrewired.com/talks. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.
This is Gibson Tivers. Don't forget to focus, take a deep breath, and leave a rating and review for my daddy's podcast. Thanks. Thank you for visiting Daddy's podcast.
That was awesome, buddy.
It sure was. Thank you.